Hello and welcome to this demo of Chronosphere's Logs Explorer. Chronosphere's Logs Explorer now allows users to analyze logs, create queries, visualize the results, and configure alerts to notification platforms. In this guided demo, we will take a look at the Logs Explorer from a developer's point of view and see how you can create sample queries, visualize results, as well as configure alerts. So let us begin. We begin by accessing the Logs Explorer from the Explorer's menu. So we click on Explorers and then select Logs Explorer. Now this brings you to the Logs Explorer view, and as you can see here, this page consists of several different elements. So let us walk through them one by one to understand their capabilities. You first have a query prompt where you can create queries to search your log events. And queries typically consist of the following three stages: a filter stage, an augment stage, and an aggregation stage. So we will take a look at some sample queries as we proceed. Secondly, you have the concept of repositories. So repositories help isolate log events and provide tenancy. Here we are currently working with the default repository. You can also change the repository that you work with by clicking on the down arrow. So let us select default for this demo. Thirdly, you can visualize the results from the queries that you execute. There are several options to choose from, and these are dependent on the kind of query that you execute. So we will take a look at some queries where we can visualize the results as a pie chart and a bar chart. Next, you have the time zone menu. So when you are analyzing log events, you need to be able to take a look at a timestamp, and the time zone menu lets you configure the desired time zone for viewing log events. You also then have the time range selector, where this allows you to configure the time range from which log events need to be retrieved. And you have several options to choose from. You can select pre-configured presets such as these, which allows you to, for example, retrieve the logs from the last 1 hour or the last 6 hours. You can also configure relative time ranges. So this could look something like 1 millisecond ago, or maybe 1 day ago, or something along those lines. And you also have fixed time ranges. Fixed time ranges would encompass a specific time window, which can also be configured if necessary. For this demo though, we will work with a preset. So let us select the presets option and click on 6 hours. So we've taken a look at some elements in the Logs Explorer pane, and we are now retrieving logs from the past 6 hours to execute some sample queries on. Okay, we also have the live checkbox. If you choose to enable the live checkbox, it allows you to execute queries against real-time data. For this demo, we will leave it unchecked. And let's move on to talk about the results visualizer. This is where you obtain the results of the queries that you execute, and it consists of two elements. It has a fields table to the left and a results window on the right. Now, taking a closer look at the results window, it contains a bar graph, which is actually a chart that identifies the number of log messages that have been returned for a given query. So as we execute queries, you will see this pattern change, which basically gives you the number of hits of log messages that are observed. So for example, for no query provided, you can see that there were 5 events that were captured in this bucket between 9:56 and 10 Central Time. Now, let's switch over to talk about the fields window. So you can see that the fields window contains several fields that have been identified as part of the log message payload. So these are fields that you can use to analyze your log messages and have them applied as fields for queries. So let's move on and try to focus on a parameter of interest. So let's try to obtain some more details about this service field, and let's click on it. Clicking on a field gives you additional information such as the potential values that it could take. So in other words, we see 3 unique values for the service field in the log messages that are being streamed from the past 6 hours. So we have log messages from billing service, or rather log messages where the service field equals billing service for 40 occurrences, and payment gateway service for 112 hits. Let us take a look at a different field. Let us now examine the severity field. So severity takes 2 values and is used to indicate the severity of the log message that is being observed. So here we have 121 error messages and 79 info messages in our log data set. Now the great thing about fields is that they can also be used to visualize your results. So let us click on the plus icon to add the severity field as a column on the results visualizer. Here we go. Okay, so as you can see now in the results window, you now see a severity column that represents the severity of each log message. So here we see that this is an error message. If we scroll to the next message, you can see that this is an info message and severity equals info. So here's a great example of how you can add a field to the results visualizer to specifically examine that particular field for every log message. You can also use fields to create queries to look for specific log messages. Let us take a look at the span ID field here. You can see that this field has reported 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 unique values. Now, how would we use a unique value to try to create a query? It's simple. You can click on the equal to symbol to match this value to a query, or click on the not equal to symbol to specifically look for log messages that do not have a specific span ID. So for this example, I am trying to look for every single log message that reports this particular span ID value. So clicking on the equal to sign generates a query for me. As you can see here, my query says span ID equals my span ID value. So let's try to execute this query and see the results that we observe. So upon running this query, I can see that the number of successfully reported events goes down from 200 to 72. I can also observe that there is only one reported value for span ID, which makes sense because I am only explicitly searching for this specific span ID value. And if I take a look at the results timeline, you can see how the results timeline's pattern has changed because these our successful messages returned for span ID equals my span ID value. Similarly, if you take a look at the payload, you can see that all successfully returned messages have a payload with span ID equals my span ID value. So that was a quick example query. Now let's try to execute a more complicated query. So let's take a look at our second query here. Now this says retrieve all messages which report a severity type equals error, and then group them based on the service that they belong to. So let us execute this query and take a look at the results that are observed. Now, as you can see here, we use the pipe operator, which allows you to include multiple stages. So here we first filter log messages of severity error, so that's a filtering stage, and then we group the returned messages by the service that they belong to. So the second stage is an aggregation stage. Now, taking a look at the results that are reported, we can see here that the results are grouped by the service that they belong to. We have 72 error messages that belong to billing service and 144 error messages that belong to payment gateway service. So this query was useful to observe the number of error messages observed by each service. This is also a great query to visualize the results using a bar chart or a pie chart. So let's try to visualize the results as a pie chart. Select pie chart from this option menu here, and now you can see that the results are visualized as a pie chart with payment gateway service constituting 66.7% of all reported errors and billing service responsible for the rest. So this is an example of a query where you can visualize the results to draw inferences. Great. So our first query was a pretty simple one, and our second query included another stage, and the results were visualized as a pie chart. Let us take a look at our third query. Here we are doing star pipe group by service. So we are using a wildcard with the star, which returns all reported events within the last 6 hours. So we are not looking specifically for severity type error here. We are looking at every single log message. The second stage, group by service, is the same from the previous query. It groups all return messages based on the service that they belong to. So let's try to execute this query. Click run and observe the results. So from the results, I can conclude that there are 3 unique services: auth service, billing service, and payment gateway service, reporting log messages. I can also observe the number of log messages reported per service. This is again an example of a query where you can plot its results as a bar graph or a pie chart. So let us click the drop down arrow and select bar chart. And there you go. Our results are now visualized as a bar chart. So it looks like payment gateway service is responsible for nearly 3 times the amount of log messages as billing service. So that's good to know. You can also add queries to dashboards with just the click of a button using the add to dashboard button. And the logs automation option allows you to configure automation alerts So let's take a look at an example automation alert. Click on logs automation, which will then bring you to the logs automation window. Now, from here, you can take a look at all configured alerts using the alerts tab. We currently have 4 alerts set up. Let's take a look at error counter alert in greater detail. In this window, we can observe more details about the error counter alert, and this is an alert that is set up to notify a Slack workspace if the error count goes above 25 over the course of 1 hour. Alerts also allow you to create labels to filter, and each alert has a specific query. In this case, we are looking for all events of severity error, and we call the result as num errors, and this query evaluates to true when num errors is greater than 25. You can configure the time window for gathering events using the time window drop-down menu. You can configure an alerts sliding time window using the time window function, and you can also configure throttling settings using the throttle period. Alerts tie into actions, where actions indicate what must be done when an alert evaluates to true. So this alert is set up to trigger whenever the error count grows above 25. Now, what happens when an alert is triggered? It kicks off the action that is associated with it. Let us take a look at the action that is set up with our error counter alert. We have this Slack action which alerts a Slack workspace when the error counter alert goes off. So this is done using a Slack webhook. Let us take a look at a sample alert. So here we are at the Slack workspace, and as you can see here, a log message was triggered by the alert that we set up. You can see here the description, which explains that this message is triggered if the error count goes above 25, and you can also see that the reported value when this event was triggered is 36. So that's a great way to set up programmatic alerts that can notify teams when a specific condition is triggered. So that concludes this demo of Chronosphere's Logs Explorer. Thank you and have a good day.